Good morning, everyone. It is a beautiful Sunday. And even if it wasn't, God would still be good. If you look at the top of your sheet today, there's a question at the top that says, how do you know when you've made it in life? And if you've got a few seconds, I'd like for you to write down some sort of answer there if you could. Some sort of answer to get you thinking the right direction. How do you know when you've made it in life? I mean, even this morning, my wife kind of joked to somebody. It's like, yeah, if you figure out adulting and you figure that out how that's supposed to work, you can let me know. So if you know when you've made it in life, go ahead and write that down. In this, our last section of planning the Exodus, we're going to be looking at three different things. We're going to talk about next steps for the Hebrew people. We're going to talk about their final proofs, extra biblical and biblical proofs, and then we're going to talk about our own Exodus and the fact that it's meant to be for us. It's a story for us for a reason. It was a story for them. It was a lived experience for them, but it's a story for us for a reason. Quick review. Moses has followed God's plan. God had a plan starting with Abraham, and it trickled down into Joseph, and it trickled down into Jacob coming in through that process, and then the whole tribe is there, and all the different things that are going on. And he has led them out of Egypt by God's miraculous works, and he's led them across the Red Sea into Midian, to the mountain of God. They're free from bondage and pursuit. Even Pharaoh's armies are now wiped out. Not all of them. It's a lot of armies in Egypt. But the charioteers, the pride and joy, the ones that paraded, they're gone. The pride of their military has been crushed. And there's no way to pursue them now on foot. It would be foolishness to do so. But something else is there that's causing them problems. So we look at this question, how do you know when you've made it in life? Another question, that kind of companion question goes with it is, what does it mean to be a good person? What does it mean to be a good person? So who thinks they know what it means you've made it? I've made it. And you know you've made it because you've got that there. Tom, you think you got an answer? The honey-do list is complete. You've made it. Nice. Nice. That could be one way to do it. I agree. Kirsten, do you have one too? If you're living for God, so it's an active in the moment. I like that answer. It's a good answer. I would say if you've been baptized and filled with God's Spirit, like you've made it. Now, have you actually made it to the finish line? No, but you're in the race. Being in the race that's the thing. Like you got to be in the race. And if you're in the race, you're in the right direction. Anything else besides that is you completing the race, right? It's your effort to complete the race. Do things God's way. So I agree. That's everyday steps. That's good stuff. So for their next steps, what they're going to do, they're going to get the 10 Commandments. There they are at the mountain. And I know I went a little out of order last week with the golden calf and things, but there they are at the mountain. And while they're there, God tells them some things. And the Lord God spoke these words in Exodus 20 and 1, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. We don't usually count this as the 10 Commandments. This isn't, when you look at the 10 Commandments, this isn't what's listed on like the courthouses. I am the Lord your God. God said, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. We don't think about that. But I promise you, you were brought out of the land of Egypt too. It's not a physical land of Egypt, but there's a spiritual land of Egypt that you were brought out of if you're in God's kingdom. And so, out of the house of bondage, slavery. And then begins the you shalls. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image. Any likeness of anything that is in heaven above or that is in earth beneath or is in the water underneath the earth. Nowhere. There's no thing you're going to carve to take the place of God. Not even God himself. I think we make mistakes when we put Jesus on a bunch of stuff. The whole I know it's a joke or whatever, like the thumbs up Jesus or the hippie Jesus, the happy Jesus, there are all kinds of images of God. God said, don't make images of me or anything else to worship. We worship a living God. Why would you make a false dead thing to worship? And so he tells us these things. Be careful of these things. You should not bow down to them nor serve them. Don't bow down to statues. And some churches have this very wrong then. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. Keep that in the back of your mind. God is a jealous God. Continues saying, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children of the third and fourth generations to those who hate me. That was my family. My dad, when he was 17, decided he was too good for church. And I think that was the straw that broke the camel's back for him, because he moved out of my grandparents' house at that time. And I don't have time to tell you all the stories of the crazy things he did, the crazy places he went, the crazy friends that he kept. But he was one of those guys, and to paint a picture for you, if you knocked over a can of beer, my dad would joke and say, "Oop, alcohol abuse." Well, we know what alcohol abuse is. It's overusing alcohol, but he thought spilling some was the abuse. I'll just say that there's enough drink in my family that we might be fish. I'll say it that way. And for a while, my family hated God. And some of them still do. And it's sad, but I think Pharaoh had this problem. We saw this. I tried to show it to you. God visits the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, to the third and fourth generation of those who hate him. So, Tom, I'm very grateful that you love God, because your kids are protected because of that. But have you chosen not to love God? God promises, I will visit the iniquities of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generation. Like, your kids were in danger because you messed up. And I'm so thankful that today we have opportunity to love God and to undo that danger. Literally, umbrella protection comes up. And all the things that would have visited, God's not putting it on them. We put it on. It says the iniquities of the father. Like, I would put it on my own kids. My mistakes would go to my kids if I did not love God. And it's never too late to start loving God and to undo this nonsense. But it's there. But the contrast is also there. Showing mercy to the thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. If you'll love God, he shows mercy, period. It was central to the understanding of what they were doing. He continues in, and there's a couple of the commandments that are interesting to me. He says, you shall not use the Lord your God's name in vain. You shouldn't apply it to things that don't apply. Don't be a Pharisee. Don't pretend to be Jesus and godly and do things in his name when you're really trying to do things your way. It says, remember the Sabbath day. Not you shall not, but remember the Sabbath day. It's a very interesting commandment then. And the same thing is true of honor your father and your mother. The first commandment with promise. You must do these things. There's no negative to this. It doesn't say you shall not disrespect your parents. You shall honor your father and your mother. So you have to be careful with how you treat your parents. You must be careful how you treat your parents. And I think the reason for that is pretty obvious. When it comes right down to it, who's truly our parent? Well, God. God, we're all his children. If you can't honor your own parent, and even in practice, how are you going to honor the great parent, the great father, right? You shall not murder, commit adultery, shall not steal, bear false witness, shall not covet. Don't have time to get into all those today. They're there. We know that they lay down the moral foundation, the framework for all good societies. In fact, that remember the Sabbath day, take time to rest, and honor your father and your mother are like crucial. In fact, you won't have a society that works itself to the bone or that does not value family. You will not have a society that lasts. They all fall apart if those two things don't happen. But the others are important as well. Now they head off into the wilderness, and while they're there, God also tells them to build some things. They're going to build a tabernacle. And I'm only bringing up a couple points of the tabernacle because there's more written about the tabernacle in the Bible than anything else in the Bible. It's very important to understand how important it is. And so there's a couple things he talks about. He says, make an ark, a box, of acacia wood. And then they're going to cover that in gold. And make poles of acacia wood because you're not allowed to touch the box. Make rings that go on the side of the box that you can put the poles through because you cannot touch the box. The box is sacred and holy unto God. You don't mess with it. And you're going to cover those in gold. And you're going to put the Ark of the Testimony. The Ark of the Testimony. It's very interesting that in the new covenant, we are given a testimony. We are called to be testifiers. We're called to example and to report of the goodness of God. It's part of our job. And the testimony is there. And he says, I will meet with you, I will speak with you from above the mercy seat. Again, we see that mercy connection right there. So there's mercy available, and he's setting all these things up for the children of Israel. Well, why? Why do they need a mercy seat? Why do they need commandments? Why do they need all these things? Why do they have to be told what to do? These exact dimensions, this exact meeting place, the design, the style of it, the focal point would be the mercy seat. Why is the focal point the mercy seat? In Duluth, what's the focal point? What's the one thing everybody knows Duluth for? The bridge, Canal Park, right? Maybe the hill, Enger Tower. Depends on where you're from, depends on what you like. But there's the lake itself, right? It's the focal point. Oh, Duluth is known because the harbor, it's a port city. It's the lake, it's the bridge, it's some landmark. In Israel, there was no landmark. It was the mercy seat was the focal point. Why would you need that to be the focal point? He knows what we need before we do. What's man guaranteed to be doing? Yeah, messing it up. Not making it, right? Messing it up, not doing the right thing. We're all good at it. Whether it's a callous word, a quick judgment, a forgotten important step, an injustice, some sort of cruelty. There's so many things we do, and we don't mean to do them always. Cut somebody off in traffic. Offend somebody. You're going to do it. We all do. But God makes plans to meet our needs. His plan was, I'm going to have you make this because you're going to need this. It's like the ultimate Boy Scout, be prepared motto. What's the one thing we're going to need? Well, we're in the wilderness. Oh, we're going to need food and supply. No, you're going to need a mercy seat. That's the number one right there. Everything else is going to literally revolve around this. Every tent is going to face that. Every single one opens to the mercy seat. Every morning they opened up, and if the pillar of fire or smoke was still sitting upon that mercy seat, then God was there, not ready to move on. And if that pillar had moved on, we're packing up camp, we're getting going. We're not going to stay around any longer, because that was their focal point. And like a father, God was instructing them, guiding them, protecting them, and blessing them. That was his job, that was his role. He knew what he was doing. And then they make the golden calf. And God, who's a jealous God, and warned them he's a jealous God in the commandments themselves, says, all right, go up to the land of flowing milk and honey, for I will not go up in your midst. I'm not going with you. Go on. I'll send the angel. You're a stiff-necked people. If I come with, I might consume you on the way. So angry right now, I might destroy all of you. Now, as parents, Don, I know you're this way. Your kids have done it. And in that brief moment, nope, get out of my sight or I'll consume you right now. I made you, I'll unmake you. You get that thought, that feeling, that, I think it's of God. Now, we don't unmake our kids, right? But you want to for a minute. And if you've ever had kids, if you've worked with children, you've had this feeling. You don't even have to have your own. Go work in a preschool someplace. You're going to want to unmake some of those kids once in a while. You would never do it because they're precious and gifts from God, but you'd want to for a second. Because they do really dumb things sometimes. Why did you pull that girl's hair? I don't know. Well, knock it off, right? Stop that. And that's just the little things. There's big things people do that just, they're not good. And we're stiff-necked people. I don't think Israel was particularly prone to this more than we're exempt. Like, we're all a little stiff-necked people, prideful, right? We all want it our way. Frank Sinatra famously wrote that song because he wanted it his way the most. And so many people said, well, me too. I like it that way, my way. My way or the, yeah, why is that such a popular phrase with us? That's a terrible way to say it. It should be the Lord's way or the highway to the bad place. It shouldn't have nothing to do with my way or the highway. Like, come on, we should know. And so these things are there and they're present with us. And Moses prays. God's ready to start over with just Moses and his family. And my wife makes a really good point, and I agree with her 100%. You don't hear about Moses' kids. Moses' family is not famous. Moses was trained and prepared and ready. I don't think his family was as much. I don't think his son, despite him having kids, I don't think they were ready. I don't think they were doing great things. Being a preacher's kid is tough, right? Show me your way, Moses prays, that I may know you and that I may find grace in your sight. He doesn't start off by making the request. He says, let me do the right thing, God. Let me do the right thing. May I find grace in your sight. And consider this nation as your people. They're not my people, God. These are your people. If your presence does not go with us, don't bring us anywhere. You might as well let us die in the wilderness because your name cannot be associated with failure. For then it will be known that your people and I have found grace in your sight except you go with us. How will anybody think you're a good God unless you go with us? They will not. Our final proofs. How many of you enjoyed finding out cool things about Egypt? A couple of you? Good. I'm going to throw you for a loop on this one. I told you we weren't going to spend a lot of time focusing on the Bible portion of this. We weren't going to use the Bible to prove the Bible, is what I said. We'll still use the Bible as references and scriptures to see how it matches. But in this case, we actually are. The Torah itself is a very interesting book. And instead of looking in Egypt for Israel, we're going to look in Israel for Egypt. Now, I'm not qualified to do all of this. I'm not a professor. I haven't studied this. This is not my life's passion. But we're looking for these things. In all of this, Professor Josh Bierman of the Bible department of Bar-Han University, this is his passion, right? This is what he does. He looks for things in the Torah that point to Egypt. And he found a lot of them. The literary construction of the Torah itself matches the languages, references, and pharaonic phrases uniquely associated with Egypt's New Kingdom in the 18th century. The way it's written. In fact, Deuteronomy, there are portions of Deuteronomy which are written, the entire book of Deuteronomy is written as a treatise in the same exact style as the rulers of this day would have written professional treaties, like legal documents that was sent between different countries, the whole thing. And if you really want to research it, you can. There's a lot to it. I couldn't possibly get it all in and still get this lesson done. The whole book of Deuteronomy is written in that style of the New Kingdom treatise. There's no reason to write like that unless you grew up under the legal minds of Egypt. In some way, rulers of that day are kind of like lawyers modernly. They're involved in the law and the making of law and the creating of law and upholding the law. And so Moses, in some ways, is like a lawyer, a lawgiver, right? Even though God gave him the law, he's presenting it. He's the go-between guy. He's very much like a lawyer. And he writes in the style of a lawyer, and he shares these things in the style of a lawyer. According to Professor Bierman, the Torah is infused with Egyptian culture and its response to it. He says this. He finds it incredibly fascinating how familiar the Torah is with Egyptian culture, and that suggests that they were indeed in Egypt and that they were there for a long time, enough to be enculturated. If you live in Minnesota long enough, we'll get you saying pop instead of soda. You'll start saying fur, like I'm going to the store for milk, instead of for milk, we're going fur milk. You're cheating. You're from McDonald County, and you hide in the woods. You don't hang out with all of us Hicks. We say it, though, and we don't say Minnesota. You always know people make fun of, oh, you're from Minnesota. No, Minnesota. And it's not Masaba Avenue, it's Masaba Avenue. Like, there's little things we do that are very unique to us. It's our culture, right? And if you live long enough with us, you start to pick up on our culture. Same thing happens everywhere you go. If you live in the South long enough, before you know it, you're starting to talk with a drawl. Because that's how you do it down there, I reckon. I'm fixing to tell you what's going on. Like, you get the point. Like, you start to pick up on the culture. And that's how we do things. And so they were in Egypt a long time, and the Torah is written with tons of Egyptian culture, not Haran's culture, or Ur's culture, or some other place that their ancestors had lived and been. In Deuteronomy it says, "And remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and by an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day." There's lots of good stuff in there, but we'll focus on the red parts, the mighty hand and the outstretched arm. These two phrases are linked and really only used in Egypt in the 18th century. These terms are always used in context of the Exodus, never anywhere else. And the Bible could have employed a lot of different ways to say these kinds of things, but the phrase is used in connection with Exodus, and it's no accident. It's literally a proof. Those words are not used other places. It's a pharaonic victory expression. Thutmose the second and fourth both are described as the mighty of arm. That was what they were called. And Sennacherib the first is lauded in that hymn as a strong arm, a champion with arm outstretched. To have your arm outstretched. Now, there are other places in the Bible where it talks about God rolls up his sleeves or bears his arm. But a mighty arm or an outstretched arm, these are uniquely Egyptian things. Be like like I mentioned, you go down south and Roll Tide or Suey Pigs or whatever it is that you like you're going to have calls that relate to your culture. In Minnesota, if you're a big fan of the Vikings, I don't know why you would be because they don't win anything, but if you were, they yell, "Skol," right? Skol is their chant. Well, in Egypt, mighty arm and outstretched arm are their chant. That was the praise of their pharaohs. And yet it's used in the Bible. Not some other thing, it's that phrase. And it was used in that way to show that God destroyed Egypt's armies and their pharaoh, ruined them and their gods with his mighty arm and outstretched arm, mighty hand and outstretched arm. These phrases are turned on the Egyptians by God. Stubble. The idea of destroying your enemies like stubble or chaff. Like the leftover stuff that comes off of the wheat, the chaff, the nonsense, the fluffy bits, to burn them up. Also an Egyptian thing. It comes from Egypt. Ramses II, in his Kadesh poem, is the only known text to have this recorded outside of the Bible. It would be very strange if the Bible was written by Ramses, and we know it's not. But that phrase is used only in context between those two places. It's the only recorded instances we have of this, which means the culture that produced that phrase must have impacted both the writer of the Torah and Ramses. Well, Ramses is the Pharaoh of Egypt. Where else would he have learned that but in the court of pharaohs, in the culture of Egypt? It's very strange that that's in the Bible then. And so Moses must have been familiar with these courtly languages. And his comparison to the poem, this Kadesh poem, and Moses' song of victory, the song he sings afterwards, are remarkable. The language and the way it's put together, the two poems are almost synonymous in the way they use the language. Not the meaning, but the way they use the language, which means they must have been inspired by the same source. If you've got water coming from one place and you test it here and you test it here, well, if it's the same water, it must have come from the same source. And so Egyptian culture must have influenced both of these things. Not just that, but geography. The writer of the Torah doesn't really understand Judah or what's in Judah or Israel. They're not familiar with the landmarks, the places, the people, other than by reputation, because they don't live there. They're very, very familiar with the Sinai Peninsula, where they had the mines and the slaves, where they would travel, where they had acacia wood. Right? They're very familiar with these kinds of things in Egypt, but not Canaan. If it was composed, as some people say, later in Judah, if it was composed in the 5th century by Judean priests, wouldn't they focus on details they were familiar with? Wouldn't they know more about Judah to talk about it? And it's not. It's not referred to that way. Instead, the text fits beautifully with someone who of princely origin, who lived in the land of Egypt, and then was not allowed to enter into the promised land. Knew nothing about the promised land because he'd never been there. He'd only seen it from a distance. That matches up perfectly with what we know of Noah. The diet of leeks and onions. Herodotus finds this when he goes on a tour of the pyramids. He finds this description of what the Egyptians fed their slaves. And it's identical to what the Bible says the slaves ate. Leeks and onions. They even whined later on, oh, we miss those leeks and onions. We're always stuck with this boring manna from heaven every day that God provides we don't have to work for. Oh. Like little kids. Whiny little kids. Do we have to have tuna fish sandwiches again? Not if you know it's good for you. Right? You get that, I'm going to undo you mode. Like, you get what you get, you don't throw a fit. That's what it is. And here they're whining, oh, those leeks and onions. Yeah, and slave labor. And beatings and tortures. And not knowing if your kids are going to be safe. Or if they're going to change their mind and start drowning them again. Like, leeks and onions were worth that? I don't think so. But they whine. And so those foods are unique and match beautifully. And others are interesting. When they start getting into Leviticus and Deuteronomy, they talk about the clean and unclean animals. A huge section of the unclean animals are not found in Israel at all. Ostrich, ibex, wild ox. Guess where they live, though? Egypt and Sinai, the places of their journey. They're not allowed to go to those places and collect those animals and eat them because God found them to be unclean, and yet they don't exist in Israel. Why would God give them rules for the land of Israel that they don't live in yet? It just doesn't make sense that they would write them after the fact. They had to have written them in the moment concerning the things that they were encountering. And then acacia wood, which I mentioned before, it only grows in the Sinai Peninsula and in Midian. They don't find it other places. It's a really rough, gnarly, durable, water-resistant, mold-resistant. I talked about this before in a different lesson, but it's a very interesting kind of wood, and it's not found other places. It's certainly not found in Israel. There's none in Israel. And it's only really mentioned in connection to the wilderness journey. It's only really mentioned in connection to the tabernacle. Anywhere else it's mentioned, it's never mentioned as a native wood that's found in Israel. So they literally built the tabernacle of foreign materials and then traveled with it. Because the land of milk and honey was their promise, but it wasn't necessarily what they were going to make life out of. All right, move on to some others. The Epur Papyrus. Interesting kind of thing. This is written by, it seems like an eyewitness. It's a poem written by an Egyptian poet. It talks about several catastrophes that struck Egypt in the 18th dynasty. They know for a fact that this is the 18th dynasty he's referring to, which I happen to think is when the Exodus took place. And there's some translations which might resemble Exodus. I'll read them for you fairly quickly. Hearts are violent, pestilences throughout the land, blood is everywhere. Lo, the river is blood, one thirsts for water. Lo, the trees are felled, and the branches are stripped, like hail and locusts had taken them over. Lo, grain is lacking on all sides, crushed all of their fields, not just some of them. Even the late grains were crushed. Birds find neither fruit nor herbs. There's nothing to eat because of the locusts. The hot-tempered man, oh, it's cut off there. I don't remember the rest of the quote. I'll skip that one. Groaning is throughout the land, mingled with laments. Lo, many are dead. Lo, many dead are buried in the river. The stream is the grave. The tomb became a stream. And he who puts his brother in the ground is everywhere. Everywhere? Everyone put their brother in the ground? Well, if all the firstborns of Egypt, all the male descendants died, sure, sounds right. Men are few, and he who places his brother in the ground is everywhere. It's a very strange poem to be writing if the Exodus did not occur. All is in ruin. The land is without light. The children of princes are dashed against walls, and the children of the neck are laid out in the high ground. Those precious kids you hold close, the children of princes, the ones that are protected against everything else, they're the ones who inherit and become pharaohs and royal priests, and they're the ones that are dashed. Gold and lapis lazuli, silver and malachite, carnelian and bronze are fastened around the necks of female slaves. The slaves wear the jewelry, really. Men have become owners, poor men have become owners of wealth. like slaves, poor men, servants, workers, become owners of wealth. The rich and the powerful's kids are dying, but the poor people get enriched. The king has been disposed by the rabble. I don't know why you would write a poem like this unless it literally meant you were referring to the Exodus problems. Now, there's a lot more to the poem. You can go read it yourself and decide if it fits, but some of these lines are just like too on the nose, for me at least. The Amarna letters. These are clay tablets that are written out. These are legal documents that are sent. And there's a trove of 382 of these that they've found so far. There's more probably, but we haven't found all. These are 382 that they have found. They keep finding them because they're all over the place and they were kind of pilfered from Egypt at a time. And they're written, in many cases, by different Canaanite rulers, expressing consternation, extreme distress, and terror at the fact that all the lands that they're in charge of, that Egypt put them in charge of, because remember, Canaan is a vassal state of Egypt. They were conquered by Egypt. They're saying that this mysterious people called the Habiru. Hebrew? Habiru. Coincidence, I'm sure. But these Habiru people come in and they're taking over the land. At the exact same time, these Amarna letters are written in the 14th century. Not the 15th century, but the 14th century, right after that. Very strange. And the letters are foreign correspondence from kings and mayors of the Levant, that oceany area where Israel is located. They're the leaders of modern-day places like Israel, Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, to the Pharaoh of Egypt, who commanded tribute at the time. And they write things that are interesting. Yapahu, the ruler of Gezer, a Canaanite city situated west of Jerusalem, in the foothills of the Judean mountains, right next to Jerusalem, he writes, to the king, Pharaoh, my lord, since the Habiru are stronger than we, may the king, my lord, give me his help, and may the king, my lord, get me away from the Habiru, lest the Habiru destroy us. Please come save me. These people are killing us. They're taking over everything. Would you believe me if I told you that one of the places that the Israelites took over was Gezer? Abdi Heba, the mayor of Jerusalem, says, may the king give thought to his land. The land of the king is lost. All of it has attacked me. I am situated like a ship on the midst of the sea, tossed to and fro. Now the Habiru have taken the very cities of the king. Not a single mayor remains to the king, my lord. All are lost. All these lands that pay you tribute are taken over by the Habiru, who are not going to pay you tribute. You need to send somebody. And there's 382 of these letters. Not all of them are related to the Habiru, but the ones that are describe how they conquer the southern Canaanite territories en masse, which is where Israel invaded originally, with Jericho and other places. But nobody from Jericho is writing. Why? Well, they're dead. The walls fell, became a rampart, and the army went up, and they lay waste to the place and burned it. There are no people from that area that can even testify because they're gone. But other mayors who were not gone, who held out, who held fortresses and held armies, and they're being taken over. And these Habiru are taking over all these lands everywhere in the south. And it's not localized. It spreads, and it's the entire region, north, south, east, west, all of these places. And it matches perfectly when they take the promised land. The Soleb inscription, and this is actually the inspiration mostly for this lesson, for this whole series. The Soleb inscription tells us some interesting things, and you may recognize where it comes from. You've seen this picture a few times now. This is what's left of the temple that this comes from. And this Soleb inscription is very interesting because it mentions something we need to pay attention to. On the Nile's west bank in northern Sudan, an Egyptian town called Soleb was there, which was excavated between those years by Michela Sheaf Georgiani. And it features a temple complex dating to the reign of Pharaoh Amenhotep III. So this is Amenhotep II's grandson. Not his son, Thutmose IV, but it's Amenhotep III. It's the grandson of Amenhotep II, who I think is the Exodus pharaoh. And he, during this time, makes this temple, and he reigns from the late 15th century to the early 14th centuries, they think. And in this temple here, they have these round pillars called cartouches. They have like inscriptions on them. So when they're round, they call them a cartouche rather than a hieroglyphic or something. And so there's all these different pillars, and some of them are in the south, and some of them are in the north, and some of them are in the east, and some of them are in the west. And on each of these things, in the corresponding cartouche, they point to an enemy of Egypt. And the enemy of Egypt is carved in there, and they showed how they enslaved them, or maybe they did. Egyptians like to brag about their military victories a little too much sometimes, and some of them aren't quite real. It's kind of like old fishing stories, right? Larry, I'm sure you've heard a few fishing stories where the fish got a little bigger each time. You've told them, okay. At first it was, just a little guy, and then it was a bigger guy, and then it was old Mossback, the legend of the lake. You get the idea. But Egypt is kind of that way. They like to tell of their conquests and how big and great and how awesome they were. And so in these many pillars here, all these enemies that Egypt has conquered, or so they said, these conquests might be a little exaggerated, but they say we've got them. We've conquered these people. We've at least subdued them, and our enemies are out there, and they correspond. So in the south, like Nubia would be like in the southern pillar because they've conquered Nubia. So they'd have slaves of Nubia attached, and you'd see kind of there. It's hard to see, but you can see they're kneeling, and they've got their arms behind their back, and their arms are tied. And they'd have an inscription saying, "We conquered this people." And what's really interesting is this one has the little bob haircut. You know what I'm talking about? The little bob haircut. Very weird looking hair, but that they think that's what, ancient Hebrew people wore. And so that's what they're talking about here, and they think this might be fabricated, some of their conquests. But the pillars of Soleb accurately identify Egypt's enemies. Geographically and by name, their enemies are on these pillars. And in the Soleb inscription, they didn't decorate their temples with fake enemies. There's no boogeymen here, right? These are real people, real people, whether they conquered them or not, whether they're just bragging about conquering them, having never actually conquered them, or maybe there's a peace treaty or something that went on. There's no actual battle. But they brag about these things. And on this one in particular, the Soleb inscription, it's a little bit damaged, and it looks like it's been scratched at a little since then. But it's the translation beneath it. It says, "The land of the Shashu of Yahweh." Some people want to argue that the Yahweh there isn't the Yahweh that's mentioned in the Bible, but there's no other word on the planet that's similar to Yahweh. God knew what he was doing. He picked a unique name and protected that name, I believe, so no one else would use it. And so the Shashu of Yahweh. Well, Shashu is an Egyptian word that translates cattle herding nomads or simply nomads. The nomads of Yahweh. Well, what did Israel do for 40 years in the desert? Yeah, they're shepherds. They wandered in the desert with no permanent home, no houses. They had tents. They traveled the desert, the wilderness, for 40 years in tents, and they were nomads. They didn't have a land of their own yet. They should have had a land of their own. And in fact, they should have had a land of their own very quickly, but they wandered. They did eventually go in, as the Amarna tablets kind of testify, that they did take the land, but they didn't at first. And so this is interesting. And so this name of Yahweh is listed here, and Pharaoh even says, "I don't know this Yahweh." And yet his grandson, 100 years later, is carving it into his temple, saying, "We conquered this people." What people? There are no people of Yahweh, according to Amenhotep II. There are no people of Yahweh, and yet his grandson is carving Yahweh into their pillars. Well, who are these people of Yahweh? Well, there's only one people of Yahweh. There's only ever been one people of Yahweh. Whether it's physical Israel or spiritual Israel, you folks, there's only one people of Yahweh. Egypt considered them a sufficient threat, a real threat. They had trounced them in their own land. They had trounced them on the away field. They didn't even bother to go after them again. And they hated them enough to put them as enemies on this temple. And so these people are there. There's no place or deity other attached to this. The only thing that's attached to these nomads is Yahweh. Well, I can't think of anybody else that would apply to. The last one, the Merneptah stele. This is a big engraved piece from Pharaoh Merneptah in 1200s, 200 years after these other ones we've talked about. And it's 2 meters tall, and it's carved in granite. And it's the oldest undisputed. No one argues this. Everyone knows that this text right here clearly mentioned Israel. So there's others that mention it, but none of them are as old as this one. And so no one argues this one. Every archaeologist on the planet, unless you're just a doofus, will agree this mentions Israel. 200 years after these other ones mention the nomads of Yahweh, Israel is a nation, which means they've probably been in a land, and they're probably enough of a people to be a nation. And so Merneptah is very likely to be this co-ruler through Ramses' life. Ramses II, the guy who bragged about himself, who literally carved other people's names out of their statues and put his own name on the statue because he was that prideful. And so his predecessor, or his successor, he goes through and he makes this stele. He carves it out. And the stele says, Canaan is captive with all woe. Ashkelon is conquered, Gezer seized, Yenuam made non-existent, Israel is laid waste, bare of seed. It is very likely that Israel here is referring to the people that have no king. There's no king here. It doesn't say that a person is captured. It says Israel is laid waste, meaning the tribe of. So this is before there are kings there. It's during the time of Judges. And he went in and fought some people and left. And we know during the time of Judges, they were often laid siege to by surrounding nations, and God had to raise someone up to stave them. And so this is written and proves that Israel is in fact a nation, that they were supposed to be in these lands, and it even mentions some of the lands of their neighbors that they were in. And so it makes sense then that this is real proof that not only Israel exists as a nation, but that the Exodus probably did happen the way they said it did. So now we have a few minutes for our Exodus. Miracles and sparing the land in Goshen during the plagues was not enough to keep them from sin. The humiliation of the Egyptian gods was not enough to keep them from worshiping them. The complete freedom and enrichment was not enough. They provided all their needs. God gave them everything they needed. It was not enough to keep them from wrongdoing. God's covenant, even though they entered into the pact, like a marriage at Mount Sinai, and they saw the goodness. They literally heard God's voice, and they said, we're afraid of him. Moses, you have to go talk to God. They heard God's voice, every one of them. They still did not keep them from making the golden cow. Israel refused to leave Egypt behind. They would not do it. And of everyone who God took out of Egypt, 2 of them entered the promised land. 2. 2 million plus people walked out of Egypt enriched, protected, blessed. 2 of them made it into the promised land because of stiff-necked living. When pastor says you got to get the old man down, he's not joking. It's not a thing. You can just pretend it's not an issue. It is the issue. You are your own worst enemy. Your stiff neck will keep you from looking up to heaven. No one else's. It's very sad, but that's the truth. And we haven't changed. Now, we have advantages. The Spirit in our lives is a huge advantage. The multitude, the many clouds of witnesses, the literacy, the Bible in your own hand or on your own device, like these are all advantages for us. They did not have those things. We have less excuse than they did. But when we're pushed, extreme adversity comes our way, we often determine, when things get rough, to do things our own way. Oh, I got this in hand. I got it. I'll take care of it. That is the last thing you should say. Just like Pharaoh, when things got rough, he's like, no, I got it. I'll take care of it. I'll do it. I'm the one who keeps the peace. I'm the one who protects the order. When we ourselves sow the disorder in our lives. And our hearts can be corrupt. See, the Exodus did not end with the Red Sea miracle. The Exodus did not end with the covenant on Mount Sinai. The covenant on Mount Sinai did not keep them. The conquest of Canaan after 40 years did not make everything better. The worldly state they found their hearts in, it's a continual exodus. You're always leaving sin behind. Sin is part of our human nature because of Adam and Eve. We must always leave it behind. But stubborn pride is not found in some place. It's growing in the soil of your own heart. In Mark 12, Jesus answered concerning marriage and said to them, "Are you not therefore mistaken?" Talking about the man who thought, well, this brother died and this brother married and this brother died and then he married the widow and then that brother, who is she in heaven? He's like, you don't get it. You don't get it. Because you do not know the scriptures nor the power of God. For when they rise from the dead, they neither marry nor given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. It's different in heaven. But concerning the dead, that they rise, have you not read in the book of Moses? We call it the Torah. We might call it Genesis or Exodus, but Jesus referred to it as the book of Moses. So if you have any question about who wrote it, if you trust Jesus, you know it's Moses. Some people want to say it's not him. Jesus said it was the book of Moses. In the burning bush passage, how God spoke to him saying, "I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." He is the God of those three. He is not the God of the dead. Wait, but they died. No, you don't understand. God is not the God of the dead. When he said, "I am the God of Abraham," Abraham's dead. No, he's not. Abraham is alive in promise. Abraham's bosom is referred to in the Bible for a reason. There are promises given to God's children. God is not the God of the dead. The Egyptians have a book of the dead. The Egyptian gods were gods of the dead in the transition into life after death, but it was death. It was a life of death, connected to death. And God is the God of the living. You are therefore greatly mistaken. Our culture's obsession with dead things and zombies and vampires and Frankensteins, all these monsters, these dead things. Skulls everywhere. That's a human obsession, not a godly one. God is the God of living things. And in Mark 12, it says, "Hear, O Israel, for the Lord our God, the Lord is one." This is the greatest commandment. He gave commandments before, he gives commandments after. The Lord, hear, O Israel. Hear. The first step is God speaks and you listen. Step 2, the Lord is one. Chalk it up. The Lord is one. That's it. Simple and plain. One. You don't have to count. There's not multitude. One. One Lord. You're going to love him with all your heart, your soul, your mind, your strength, everything you've got. And the second commandment is very similar. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. There's no greater commandment than these. Should we then be surprised that the cure for pride, a hardened heart, a stiff neck, self-love, is living a life for others, loving worship of God, and sharing the love that he gives us to other people? I don't think we would be. God's plans for us. From the very beginning, I talked about plans. Learn from the past. Believe his word. Trust in his plans. Rely on his counsel, his help. And worship no other. That's the plan. A man's heart plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. Lord, you will establish peace for us. You want peace in your life? It does not come from something you do. It comes from something you do with God, for God, in his direction. You have also done all our works for us. No good thing in your life comes from you. I hate to break it to you. It all comes from God, and he has plans for you, and he wants to see you succeed. He wants all good things, all peaceful things, all mercies in your life, but they're not going to come from you. And if Exodus tells you anything, it's that you cannot trust you to get it done. Thank you guys for hanging out and learning all these good things. I've got a few more examples there if you want to do some more research. I hope you've learned some good things in this series. It's been wonderful to teach it. I hope you've been blessed as much as I have been. God is good. Take him with you everywhere you go. We'll see you guys in a little bit when we're ready for worship at 11. God bless.